There are several different types of bone cells, so let's go through each of these one by one. The first type are called osteogenic. So osteo means bone, and gen means like generate, like to make. So these are bone stem cells, and these are undifferentiated and have the ability to become different types of bone cells. These are found in the endosteum and the periosteum linings of the bone tissue. The second type is called osteoblast. So these are going to be bone-forming cells. So they're a single layer on the endosteum or the periosteum. These are non-mitotic, so they do not do mitosis. They get generated from osteogenic cells into osteoblasts. Stress or fracture on the bone will encourage this generation. So whenever you put stress on the bones, that can be as simple as just using your skeleton by walking around, or something as injurious as getting a bone fracture will cause osteogenic cells to form into osteoblasts. An osteocyte, so bone, and then cyte means cell. So this is a mature living bone cell. This is my bone cell here. They live inside of these little lakes. So this little lake right here is called a lacunae, and the osteocyte lives inside of this little lakes. There are projections off of this little lake called canaliculi. So this is a canaliculi. And these projections will reach up and touch the next adjacent bone cell. So these canaliculi will allow this one to communicate with the next bone cell. These osteocytes, they deposit a matrix, which becomes the actual hardened bone tissue. So eventually they deposit enough matrix around themselves that they get trapped in this hardened bone tissue and are trapped in this little lake. An osteoclast is a bone-destroying cell, and this is a conglomerate of many stem cells will fuse together into this big osteoclast. So to look at the size different, this is one osteocyte, this is one osteoclast. It's really big. And it's got this border called the ruffled border here, which goes back and forth to increase surface area for resorbing or removing of bone tissue. So these are used in bone remodeling when an area of the bone needs to be destroyed so that it can grow somewhere else or to receive stress somewhere else. These are going to remove this bone tissue here along this ruffled edge. We have two types of bone tissue. The first is called compact bone, and this creates that kind of outer shell of most of our bones. Compact bone is made up of sheets of bone called lamellae, and so you can see these kind of sheets being laid down here. Concentric lamellae form around Haversian canals. So this center here, right here, 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 those are called Haversian canals or central canals, whichever term you like to spell better. And then around that, we can see concentric circles forming. So here's a circle, here's a circle, here's a circle. And so concentric is just when one circle is within another circle within another circle. So these are called concentric lamellae. Circumferential lamellae, so let's talk about geometry. What's the circumference of something? Circumference is the entire outside. So the circumferential lamellae are out here. These are going to make circles all the way around outside the circumference of the bone. And then if you look closely, circles don't ever line up correctly. So there's always little areas in kind of the corners where the circles don't match up perfectly. And these are called interstitial lamellae. Interstitial lamellae. So an osteon is one central canal plus all of its concentric circles. So this is one osteon. these are connected together by these perforating canals. So here's a perforating canal, here's a perforating canal, here's a perforating canal, and these connect these two osteons together so that the yellow is the nerves and then the red and the blue are the arteries and the veins, can carry information and blood throughout the entire living tissue. Here you can see the little lacunae. So all of these little black spots are the little lacunae, and these are going to be filled with osteocytes. And all of these tiny little pieces that stretch between each are the canaliculi, which is how they communicate with each other. Compact bone is very strong, but also flexible. So this is what's called a composite material. If you've ever gone fishing, you have probably used a fishing rod. Fishing rods are a composite material like this. Fishing rods are made up of glass, which is flexible, and then resin, which is really brittle. But when you put the two together, you make something that's strong but flexible. And that's how our bones are too. They're made up of collagen, which is flexible, and then a ceramic component called hydroxyapatite, which gives it its strength. But each on their own would make the bones too flexible or too brittle, but together they provide a flexible strength. Our next type of bone tissue is called spongy bone. And spongy bone is made up of these kind of lattices of trabeculae and plates. And it's typically found in the epiphyses of the bone. We don't need central canals here because this entire free space is full of liquid. So this is all full of that medullary liquid, which is going to carry blood to these cells without needing like central canals. Trabeculae form along lines of stress. So this is the femur, right? So this would be the hip. This is the leg. When you walk, you're put stress down here and here. And so that pushes this area into compression along these stress lines. And then it kind of bends it here along there. You end up with tension. So along these stress lines is where we build up spongy bone. Areas where there's not a lot of spongy bone, we find don't have a lot of stress. And our bones remodel constantly. So if you change your gait or you change how much you weigh and it puts different stress on different parts of your body, your bone will remodel and adapt to that to make sure that there's bone where there's stress and we don't need bone where there's not a lot of stress. Inside of our bone, we have a couple of different types of bone marrow. And this is a soft tissue, and it occupies the medullary cavities and the epiphyses of our different bones. So you can see in the picture in red, we have red bone marrow in the skull, the ribs, the sternum, the vertebrae, the kind of wide portion of the hips, the head of the femur, and the head of the humerus. So that's generally mostly in the center of your body. And this red bone marrow produces blood cells. So red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And this is very important. As an infant, most of our bone marrow is red. And then as we grow to an adult, you can see all of the rest of the bones that aren't highlighted red. So like the humerus, radius, ulna, femur, tibia, fibula, are all going to have what's called yellow bone marrow. And it's yellow because it's adipose tissue inside of the medullary cavity. And these are no longer needed to produce blood cells. There has been evidence that in times of need, your body can actually repurpose some yellow blood marrow back into red blood marrow as you need. So take a moment and contrast between the compact and spongy bone tissue.